Hello, everybody. I'm Steve, and I'm here today with H.B. Diaz, the author of one of my favorite books of the year, is Nocturne, a collection of dark tales. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's awesome.
I'm really excited. Uh, usually when I picked up your book, and I usually try and sit down and be in the mood to read and kind of settle myself. But when I started reading Nocturne, I carried it everywhere with me that day.
Oh,
I couldn't set it down. So it
that's
was
wonderful to hear. Thank you.
it was a
That's
great read.
awesome.
So, for those who aren't familiar with Nocturne or your work, how would you describe it to them?
It's essentially a collection of everything spooky that had come into my brain or been published in, I think, between 2018 and 2020. Um, Most of them are gothic in some aspect or another. That's my favorite genre to write and read. I'm obsessed with it. I could talk to you about Dracula for 100 years. Um, so if you're looking for something extra creepy and gothic and lots of ghosts and haunted widows walks, then Nocturne's your jam.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a great read, and I was really I think I mentioned in my review, but I'm a fan of short stories, and it's really it's really difficult to write a short story that captures the reader. What do you usually? Is there any tips or anything that you do to kind of draw the reader in and still leave them satisfied in a short amount of time?
Um, I would say every single word matters. You don't have a lot of time to get to where you're going. So you've got to start there. I sort of start there and work my way backwards when I'm writing. Like, where do I want this to be? And I'll start there, piece it together. Um, but yeah, you don't have a lot of space to even for a few words that don't fit in the sentence. Um, so just paying extra attention to every single thing and every metaphor and every image that you can pack in there. It has to be very dense, I feel like, without feeling like it reads dense.
Yeah, that's a good.
So
Have you always written short stories? Is that kind of what you enjoy writing, or is that just kind of what happened?
that's sort of what happened. I've been writing novels since I wrote my first novel when I was 9. So I've always been writing books. I remember I was on a plane on a family vacation, and I remember finishing this little book I was writing in one of those 99-cent composition books. And I was 9 years old, and ever since then, I've just written novels and after novels after novels. But it's not, I almost wasn't fulfilled by it, I think, because I know now that I was writing the wrong thing. I had been writing romantic suspense, and with the short stories, they immediately came out horror. They came out gothic. They came out like, where did you come up with this? My grandmother called me and she says, what happened? It's a good thing you sent me pictures of your adorable baby, because these are really dark.
Yeah.
But I sort of felt home there, I think. And now that I've found my feet and found my voice in the short stories, I've been able to start writing novels again in the gothic horror genre. So it sort of helped me find myself, I guess, and the author that I wanted to be, in smushing it all together and just seeing what happened.
Yeah. So have you always gravitated towards horror even at a young age?
I definitely did. I loved the cop shows. I would watch them with my mom. I remember watching CSI all the time with her when I was like 10 years old, and just loving the autopsy scenes, and just it always fascinated me. but I don't think I moved from crime into horror until I read Dracula in high school. And I read that book and I was like, this is home. And from there it just spiraled.
Wow. So what was it about Dracula that kind of drew you in and you fell in love with the genre?
I think the atmosphere of it first, and just how brooding, and it's perfect to me. But I loved that it wasn't what I had expected at all, because I was exposed to all kinds of Dracula things. You have the movies and anything you can imagine is about Dracula. And the book was not what I was expecting at all. And I really liked that. I liked that it was how you have John Harker, who's supposed to be the hero, but you have Mina, who I think is the real hero of the whole story. And it's just sort of Stoker had flipped the gender norms of that particular era and completely flipped them around, but did it in a way that you don't really notice until you start looking.
Yeah.
It just fascinated me so much that you could pack so much into a story that was outside the actual storyline. And I'm just fascinated by it. Just loved it.
And I have to read that book.
Oh, yes, please read Dracula. It's...
Yeah, I saw you mentioning Stoker on Twitter, and I started looking into his work, and it's one of those books you always want to read, but I just haven't gotten to it. But yeah, so now I have to read it.
It's long, and like I said, it's not. I don't think it would be what you would expect Dracula to be. It's very gothic. It's written in letters and diaries and journal entries and things like that. So there are parts that are slower than other parts, but it was the first book that actually scared me. Like, I couldn't sleep. There's some scenes in it where you're like, oh no, I need to sleep with the light on tonight.
Oh, wow. That's a good one then.
Mm-hmm.
It always fascinates me, all the different authors I've spoken to, they all have a different story of getting their work published. And some authors don't even try, and they just go independent. Some try to get their work with the publisher. What have been your experiences in getting your work published?
For a long time, I was querying the romantic suspense novels that I was writing, and I would get some interest, and there was always, I would get full requests, and the agents would write back that it just wasn't quite what they were looking for. It wasn't quite right, or the characters weren't quite developed. And like I said, that I think I was writing the wrong thing. And once I let myself write more horror, I've got a gothic novel that I'm querying now that I've had a little bit interest in, so fingers crossed on that. But I sort of had set the traditional publishing aside and started writing the short stories. And it was so fulfilling to me to see my work in a book, and hardcover book, paperback, just to hold it in my hands and open to the page that had my name on it was so fulfilling. And I got kind of addicted to it. I was like, I need to write more stories, or this call is really awesome. I'm going to write a story for this. And every once in a while I get a yes. And it's those yeses that keep me going.
It's that natural high.
It is. It really is. The rejections suck, of course, but for every however many, I get the one that is sometimes it's exactly what I needed at the time that I received that email. So I keep going.
That's good. Well, I'm glad you did, because I'm a fan.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So what is it like to have your work that you work on? So you have this work that you've worked hard on, and it gets released out into the public, and it's out for everyone to read. Is that a vulnerable feel? What is that like? Because I always wonder that.
Vulnerable is a great way to put it, because these are your babies. You put your your heart and soul into these. Some of them are difficult to write because they come from a raw place, or they come from somewhere that if there's something in life that you're trying to process, at least for me, sometimes they come out in a story. And to have people read it, and it's just you just feel very exposed. And depending on the story, sometimes I write stories just for fun, and there's a little less risk involved in that. But otherwise, it's very nerve-wracking, and I don't know. It's wild. It's a wild thing. It's like, I guess, an artist who paints a portrait or something, and it's in a museum. You're going to have people who don't understand the vision, or think that it's ugly, or then you'll have people who think it's amazing. So it's just depends. It's all preference.
Yeah, it's the nature of art, I guess, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
For your short stories and even your novel, the novels you've written, are there specific places you get inspiration from?
I always return to either when I get stuck and I can't write, I usually return to Dracula, just read a page, and it'll set me back. Or I will read The Haunting of Hill House. So there's not so much of a physical place, but there's a place in a book that I will go to find myself again. But I love nature. So if I can be outside with my feet on the ground, then I'm good to go.
Yeah. You know, reading your short stories, I wondered if you had experienced any paranormal or any strange events in your life that kind of give you inspiration for any of your short stories.
I really haven't. And it's all, and there have been a few instances of things that were unexplained, but they also had a logical explanation. And I'm always one to believe the unexplained portion of it. So, like, for example, a few days ago, our doorbell started ringing for no reason. There was nobody there. And I, of course, thought my house was haunted, but it turned out it was just a faulty wire. But it's kind of disappointing.
That's not the answer you wanted.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I haven't really experienced anything that was blatantly supernatural.
Yeah. There was one of the short stories, The Pocket Watch. It struck me because I've heard stories that people have told me stories like that when a family member passes or something happens and something strange happens at the same time, that these events are happening. So that kind of made me wonder if you had experienced anything like that.
It was inspired by that kind of phenomenon where somebody will get a phone call from their grandmother, and then the next day we'll find out that they'd actually passed before they got the phone call. It was just kind of inspired by that strangeness and wonderful. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It really is. What is it about horror that draws you to, and I'm a big horror fan too, but I wonder, what is it about horror that draws people to horror? Because it's not really pleasant. It's not happy. It's dark, and it's, like you said, it's dark and it's brooding.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That people are drawn to it.
And it's, that uncomfortable feeling. So what is it about horror for you that draws you towards it?
I think it's almost like right before there's a thunderstorm or a tornado, you get a little bit excited about it. Like, oh, something's going to happen. And I think that horror is kind of related to that. But I also think that there's a lot of horror, real, true horror in the world. And the things that I write exist on another plane. They're supernatural in nature. They can't happen. And I think there's something comforting about that, where I don't know. Sometimes there's so much going on in society and on the news that it's almost a comfort to go into a novel about a ghost that's haunting someone or a demon that's possessing someone, because you know that you're safe there because it won't actually happen. Does that make sense?
That's a really good way to explain it. That's a perfect way to explain it. Yeah, it's really good. Uh, if an aspiring writer came to you for advice, what advice would you give them?
Don't give up. Don't ever give up. So like I said, I've been writing since I was 9, and I think I've been submitting my work since I was 12.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't start getting things published until I started doing the short stories. I think my first one was in 2017. So it was a long haul. And I go back and I read the queries that I wrote when I was younger, and I read the stories that I wrote, and I'm like, yeah, I get why that wasn't published. And I think publishing works on its own timeline. It's like an alternate universe timeline. And so you have to be so patient and outrun that self-doubt that we were talking about before. You just got to write and write and write and outrun it. That's the only way to keep going, because it's so easy to get down on yourself with all the rejections. And I think that all writers at some level or another have that similar feeling of I'm not good enough, or this story sucks, or but you just got to keep at it, keep chipping away.
How do you balance your time that you spend writing and your personal life and everything else that we have in our lives? How do you balance everything? Is it a challenge?
It's sometimes I don't balance it well, honestly. I work full time from home, and I have a toddler, and it's tricky. Sometimes I'll try to wake up early, but toddlers also wake up early, so that doesn't always work. But my husband's been awesome. He will snatch up the kid and say, go write, or like he'll give me half an hour or 45 minutes, and any second that I have, I carry a notebook around with me, just jotting ideas down while I'm waiting for something to cook in the microwave. It's just like any chance that you have, just write a sentence. It's more than nothing.
Yeah. Since you mentioned you have a toddler, since you became a mother, has your outlook or your writing style changed at all? Have you looked at things differently with obviously in life, but in your writing style, have you noticed a change in how that works?
Yeah, I absolutely have. And I'll say I wasn't expecting to, because I thought I had found my own voice already. And I think before my son was born, I was writing a lot of monster horror, with a lot more gore. And I found that since he's been born, I prefer the atmospheric, creepy factor as opposed to the gore. And I have no idea why that happened. There's just some things I can't tolerate anymore. Like I can't, body horror really troubles me now. I can't handle it. And I don't know why that happened. It's just, maybe I've found my voice a little bit better since becoming a mother, and it's just gothic now.
Yeah, it's funny the way that we change after we become parents and how our outlooks on everything change.
Yeah, the whole world changes.
Yeah.
I've been in my house. I haven't been really out into the world at all because of the pandemic. But the whole world is different now. It's a lot scarier because things that you don't pay much attention to before, you're like, oh no, that's not good. I don't want my kid to see that or experience this, but it's just life.
Yeah. And during the last year and some change since the pandemic started, has it changed your habits? I mean, obviously, because we can't really go anywhere, but has it drastically changed the way your writing process?
Not so much the writing process, but I have social anxiety. So the fact that I have not had to see people in a year means that when I see people again, it's going to get tricky.
Yeah.
But we're slowly bringing people back in, and as they get vaccinated and things are safer. But yeah, I've just been living in my happy little mom bubble for the last year, so
Yeah.
it's scary to open things back up again and start going out into the world. And but I want my son to experience those things, so because there's some pretty cool stuff out there.
Yeah. It's funny, the things that we never thought about doing, or it was just typical everyday things a year and a half, 2 years ago, is now like, it's you view those small things really differently now.
Exactly, and everything is so complicated now. It's we really took for granted just going to the grocery store or going out to eat or going to the movies, like these things that we really can't do that much anymore, or the way that we have done them has changed.
Yeah.
So it's a strange time to be alive.
Yeah. Do you ever experience writer's block?
I do. It's usually because I'm stressed out or I can't focus enough. If there's a lot going on in my life, it sort of jumbles everything up in my brain, and I don't feel free to just sit down and think of something. But I'll return back to those books that I like, and it usually inspires me. Or I will watch Supernatural or X-Files. They're my go-to when I need to feel inspired. My muse,
Yeah.
Dean Winchester or Mulder.
Those are good ones. Are there any movies or music that you find inspiration from?
Let's see. I really loved The Orphanage. It's a Spanish film, and I think it's grief horror, but it's so perfectly creepy and quiet, and it just lingers with you. I think it's been years since I've seen it, and I still think about it like once a week. So if you haven't seen it,
No, I have to watch that.
it's a good one.
Yeah.
But aside from that, haven't had time really to watch a lot of movies recently. But well, every night after dinner we watch an episode of Supernatural, and I'll get my ideas from that, or like, oh, that's a cool monster that they're talking about. Let me research that until I can't see anymore. And
Yeah. As you've written all your short stories and even in your novels, have there been any scenes that have been difficult to write?
I actually really disliked writing the parasite that's in Nocturne. It's just 100 words, but I have a problem with worms and things that take over your body. But I wrote it for a call that I really wanted. It was a online magazine that I really wanted to be a part of, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try it, and it got published, but I really didn't like writing it.
So you're not a fan of worms, huh?
No, yeah. I am not. No.
You mentioned that you've been writing since you were 9, and you wrote your first novel. Were there any childhood books before Dracula that, even if out of the horror genre, that inspired you, or kind of got the love of reading from?
Yeah, my uncle gave me a set of Nancy Drew books when I was young, and there are like 150 of them, and I read every single one. But then I also read Call of the Wild by Jack London like 6 times in a year. I was just obsessed with it, and it's a very dark dark story, I think. I don't know why I liked it so much, but I got kind of fixated on it. And I liked Boxcar Children. I never read Goosebumps or any horror. My parents kind of kept me away from that sort of stuff. But yeah, Boxcar Children, Nancy Drew. Trying to think anything else. Cam Jansen. I read a lot of the Cam Jansen books, but your standard 90s kids books.
Yeah, that is pretty standard 90s kids. Have there been any authors that you initially disliked but then grew into enjoying their work?
That's a good question. I remember reading Dean Koontz when I was very young, and I think I was maybe too young to read Dean Koontz because it didn't just scare me, it disturbed me, and not in like the fun way. But the more I read, the more and more I liked the books, and I really loved that in almost every one of his books there's a dog that plays some kind of role in the end of the story. And it's got to the point where I was waiting for the dog to show up. Like, this is the real hero of the story. And I love dogs, so yeah. I was a big fan, but not initially a fan of Dean Koontz.
What have you learned about yourself during your writing career?
That's a good question. I think I've learned to accept that I'm a little weird, and it's okay. You know, when you're young, you try to fit in so much and you try to be like everybody else, so you're part of that friends group or what have you. But the older I get and the more I write and the weirder my stuff gets, the more I can accept that and be proud of, really, how strange I am.
Yeah, you're in good. Yeah, you have a lot of company there.
I think we're all a little strange. We have to be. It's a weird world.
I think the people who are honest will say that. We're all a little off.
Yeah.
So it's okay. If you could have dinner with an author, with any author, alive or dead, who would it be and what would you ask? And I guess your answer would probably be Stoker.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what would you ask?
What would I ask Stoker? I would just like to sit down with Stoker and talk to him about how he learned all the folklore that he wove into Dracula. It just fascinates me so much, and there's so much in it that I'd love to just pick his brain with all the knowledge that he has. And I think Arthur Conan Doyle is another one I would love to sit down with, and I would love to talk to him about spiritualism because he was a huge proponent of the spiritualist movement. I'd love to sit down with him and just hear everything he has to say about it. And still Gothic, but
Yeah.
towards the end of the Gothic, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think I kind of moved. He was sort of my bridge from crime to Gothic because it's centered right in the middle, and I just love how much of a jerk he is. He's very much the anti-hero of that whole series, and I think that's fascinating. Everybody loves him, but he's not an awesome guy, and it fascinates me as to how Doyle made a character likable who is entirely unlikable. Just the way that, and I still haven't figured it out. It's some kind of magic he's got going on, I guess.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask you, how do you do that? How do you make? Because I know some authors are really great at that.
Yeah, I really admire authors who can take an unlikable person and make the reader root for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, everybody roots for Sherlock Holmes. You want him to solve the case, but he's a jerk. He's mean to everybody, and he doesn't like. So why? I'm still trying to figure out what writing mechanism, and maybe I'm overthinking it, and that's probably the problem, is that it just has to be a natural thing, how you make an anti-hero like that. But I'm still writing heroes, I guess, so maybe I'll get there someday.
Yeah, we'll get there. Do you ever research historical events and have that as inspiration for your stories or for your novels?
I do actually. Researching is one of my favorite parts of writing. I just love to, specifically in the Victorian Edwardian era. Everything that happened. I love it. I love. I have a book that I just got. I'm really excited to read. It's about how the Victorians invented murder. They invented the crime. Like Sherlock Holmes, they invented the solving of crimes in a way, in like a detective kind of way. And I'm really excited to read it. And I recently read a book on the cholera outbreak. It's that whole era. I love it so much.
It's interesting.
It's so fascinating.
I think we view, you mentioned cholera. I think ever since this pandemic started, we view those kind of historical events or even fictional stories, we view them a lot differently now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so differently. It's especially the Spanish flu pandemic. I didn't know much about that, but because photography existed, you have these pictures that are so similar to the pictures that we have now. And it's amazing to me how little we've all changed, I guess.
That's a good point.
Had people during the Spanish flu protesting the masks, and we still do that today. And it's really interesting to me, just as anthropologically, how we as a society haven't changed all that much at all. And I think that's also why I like the Victorian era and the Edwardian era, is you see the pictures of the stern faces and you have this certain idea about how things may have been. But the more I dig into it and the more I research, is we're all just the same. We're all just going about doing our business in different clothes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think of it that way. It's a really great point.
Thanks.
Is there a certain way that you select names for your characters?
I have a giant book of baby names that I got that I just read. And I just read all the names, and then I'll highlight ones that I like. And so I have that kind of in the back of my head as a bank of names that I like, or I like the sound of. A lot of my characters start out as John or as Kathy, and then they, as I learn more about them, it's sort of a placeholder until I know who they are. And then I'll go back or another character in the story will call them by the name they're supposed to be. And I'm like, oh, okay. You're not Kathy anymore. You're Sally or what have you, because the other character has called you Sally.
Well, that's really interesting. So they kind of evolve on their own. They're kind of their own living things.
Yeah. And I just have that book that I keep track of names that I like, so I'm aware that they're out there. But I'm kind of a traditionalist. I like, in my stories, I like the traditional names. I think because I write a lot in that Edwardian era, where you have common names like Mary and John and that kind of stuff. So I sort of stick to that.
Yeah, there was one story that in Nocturne that really got to me. Well, they all got to me, but one that made me wonder is the ruins at the end of the story when the other person's calling his name and the monster, it takes his attention away, and you wonder what you would do in that position if you were would you save yourself and just not warn the other people, or so that really made you wonder in the moment while you're reading the story, what would I do if I was in that position and someone else? I guess you have to think, how much do I like this person?
Yeah, I
But
guess.
yeah, it really really got. I mean, I still think about it. I still think about that story and
Yeah.
what you would do. How do you make the decision? And in the moment, you'd have to make it in a second. But
Right. And then you have to live with, or assume that you've
yeah,
chosen to live. You have to live with that decision.
yeah.
Um,
And at the end, he said, he tells everyone else, I haven't seen him. I don't. He didn't want to say anything. So that really stuck with me. That really got to me.
oh
That
yeah,
was
just
yeah.
sort of inspired by the. Um, it's really, I think we would all like to think that we would sacrifice ourselves for someone else. Um, but when you really get right down to it, like you said, you have to decide in a moment what you're going to do. And some people would do it without thinking, and some people wouldn't. And I don't know which one of those I would be. And that sort of bothers me. And I think that's what inspired the story.
I think that's why it stuck with me, because you wonder,
Yeah, you just
yeah,
really don't. And I think you really can't know until something like that happens.
yeah,
And, hopefully nothing like that would ever happen. But yeah, it kind of bothers me that I don't, especially if it was a stranger. I don't know. I don't know what I do.
yeah. Because in the moment when I was reading it, I didn't know really what I would do. And then now that I think about it, of course you want to think, well, I would warn that person and I would sacrifice myself. But yeah, so it really stuck with me. And I noticed that a few of the stories in Nocturne, and I think I mentioned this in the review, but a lot of the stories read like poetry. They really flow. They flow like poetry. Was that intentional that you did that?
I used to write a little bit of poetry, but I think I really just enjoy the what I call the old style of writing, um, from that Victorian and Edwardian era, where it's sensational, I guess, in the old sense of that word, where it invokes a lot of your senses. And I like to, with every sentence that I write, I really try to let the reader feel that sentence instead of read it.
Hmm.
And um, but as far as it coming off as poetry, thank you. That's very nice. I appreciate that. But it's not an intentional like poetic writing. Because I don't think I'm very good at poetry, which is why I stopped writing it. But I do like that it's kind of sensational, old way of writing.
Yeah, they really flowed. And it was like bits and pieces here and there. Yeah. So
Thank you.
I wonder if that was on purpose or if that just kind of happened naturally for you.
Oh yeah, it's sort of that writing style has sort of become my voice over the past year. Um, and I think I was previously was trying to write in many different voices. So there's some variation in the stories in Nocturne. You probably could tell which stories I had written more recently and which stories I had written before, just because the voice is slightly different and the subject matter is slightly different. But I don't know. I just like to stick to my. I don't want to say where I'm comfortable, but stick to where I can hear myself the best. I guess.
Yeah. Is there anyone in your life that you bounce ideas off of as you're going through your writing process, or as you start to develop ideas? Do you bounce ideas off of anyone and kind of get their feedback?
I do. My poor husband. I'll come up with some story idea and I'll tell him the whole thing, and in like 45 minutes it'll take me to to get it all across in an ambling sort of way. And he's very nice about it. He listens and will ask me questions, and it always seems to be the right question, because he'll ask me questions I don't know the answer to, and figuring out the answer helps the story be better. Um, but there used to be a lot more people that I would talk to about my writing. But I think since this pandemic and since I had my son, I've been pretty isolated. So it's just my poor husband having to deal with my crazy.
Does he sleep okay at night with all your ideas?
It doesn't seem to bother him too much.
Yeah,
Every once in a while, I'll get a damn, but like, why?
That's good. I guess that would be good as a horror writer, that someone has that reaction to it, right?
Yeah, it's a good reaction.
Yeah.
So we're like, that's messed up. Yes, all right, I did it.
I'm on the right track. Yeah.
Yes.
So before I let you go, I had a couple of user submitted questions.
Ooh.
So I had one from my wife. She asked, and I think we've already gone over it, but your favorite horror author would be?
Yeah, Stoker. But I do like Dean Koontz now, and I'm having so much fun reading all of the indie authors that I've met on Twitter. The writing community there is this one of the coolest things, and so whenever I see somebody that has a new book launch, or I'll always try to download a copy, because there's so much to learn from everybody, and everybody has a different voice, and everyone has a different way to come at certain subjects. And so rather than sticking with one author, it's really helped me branch out and read something that I might not typically read, because I've talked to the person on Twitter, and so it's just nice to support everybody and feel supported. And especially in this pandemic times when we don't have that in person, we still have this community that it's just really cool. I'm glad I stumbled across it.
Yeah, it's funny because I was always afraid of Twitter because of people can be really, really nasty on there, and
Yeah.
But I think I found this little bubble of really friendly people, and a lot of independent authors, and I found a lot. I mean, that's how I found Nocturne is on Twitter, and just kind of browsing over it, and I've found so many books there and met so many nice people that it's a nice little community there. I think
it really is.
Yeah.
It's when you log on, you're going to see, at least within the writing community and the people that I follow, you're going to see a lot of good news, and it's really nice to hear good news. And I mean, essentially, we're all in competition with each other, but that never ever comes across. It's so cool to have so many people supporting each other, and every day seeing that support, and seeing someone who landed an agent or just getting their book published. It's just so encouraging. Like,
yeah,
I can do this too. Like,
yeah, it's
really neat.
I think some people underestimate the impact of even just a retweet. Someone just retweeting your, it just a mouse click, but it can send your work out to one person even that didn't know about it before.
Exactly.
So I think every little thing helps, and it's great to see that there's so many supportive people there.
Yeah.
It surprised me. Since you've been getting into that community, have there been any books that you've stumbled across that you really enjoyed? I
talk about Marianne Halbert's book Cold Comforts a lot on Twitter, and it's wonderful. And I think about the first story. It's called When Betsy Whispers. I think about it all the time. It just got stuck in my head because it's so lyrical and wonderfully written that it just lingers. I said in my review of it, I said it's haunting in the best way, because it really is. And that kind of stuff is really an inspiration, because you just see the different voices of everybody's story, and you think, well, what if I were to try to write a story in a similar voice? How would it be different coming from me?
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. But yes, so go read that book if you haven't read that. Cold Comforts.
I was just writing it down. That's Cold Comforts, right?
Yeah, Cold Comforts.
I'm going to order that tonight. So Another question was from Raul Reads. That he did a review on your book too.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a
Awesome.
yeah, he's a great guy. He wanted to know. His question was: a lot of stories deal with mental health as a theme. Is losing one's sanity, is that something that scares you?
Ooh, that is a good question. Um, there's nothing more horrifying to me than slowly losing your mind. Um, but I think more horrifying than that would be realizing that you're losing your mind and no longer being able to trust yourself. I mean, we look at take for granted our senses, and we can trust that we are seeing what we're actually seeing. But when you can no longer do that, I had, for example, I had a situation where I was just making dinner. I was waiting for a pizza crust to cook and scrolling through Twitter, and I heard a woman screaming, help me," outside my window. And I ran down to get my husband. I said, "Somebody's screaming for help." It was the most blood-curdling scream I had ever heard in my life. And he rushed upstairs, and I noticed that the dog hadn't woken up. And I was like, that's odd. Why? He didn't hear that? There was nobody outside. Nobody heard it. And I just sat there and I was like, did I imagine that? And I think it turned out, that I was scrolling through Twitter with my volume on, and I follow a lot of horror writers, and it was a book trailer.
Oh, wow.
But it took me a long time to figure that out. And when you question your sanity like that, it's absolutely terrifying, because you just don't know if what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
And so I write a lot in, I think, what Poe called the interval of horrible sanity, or something to that effect, of a person who has lost their mind, who all of a sudden realizes that they are insane. And that singular moment is terrifying and inspires a lot of my stories.
Yeah, that is terrifying. I guess it's better not knowing than it is knowing, because it gets to that moment where you realize.
Yeah, because if you look outside and you see a dog walking around who is not actually there, the realization that it's not actually there is what's scary, not actually seeing the dog. So
And knowing you can't control it.
Exactly. Yeah.
That gave me the chills.
Yeah, it's me too. I have goosebumps.
So one more question for you. Nick over on our forums asked if you have any favorite horror movies.
Ooh, yes. We talked about The Orphanage. I love that movie. I recently watched the Haunting of Hill House series, that I actually haven't finished it yet because I don't want it to be over. But that was so well done, and so I think I could talk about just that first episode forever, because it was, you expect to see something terrifying the whole time.
Yeah.
The whole time you're watching that first episode, and it's so stressful in the best way. But it's also based on one of my favorite books, The Haunting of Hill House. So, but I don't actually watch a lot of horror movies. I enjoy quiet horror. I'm not a big fan of the gore in movies. The Saw franchise, I can't do it.
Yeah.
But I think I'm often disappointed with horror movies, because I always go into it hoping that they're like The Haunting of Hill House, or like Dracula, or in that atmosphere. and they almost always let me down because they focus more on the gore. And but if anybody has any horror movie recommendations that are quiet and but also frightening, I will take them.
Yeah, I love horror.
I'm sorry, what was that?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I watched Exorcism of Emily Rose many years ago, and that one still sticks with me.
Yeah.
That was terrifying.
I forget her name. She is such a good actress. She's in that movie. She's just, I mean,
amazing.
Yeah, she's awesome. And in the Hill House series, there's so many talented actors in that series that it's just packed full of just really talented people, and it's impressive. They have such a great lineup.
The whole series is so, it just with the writing and the directing, it's just a little ball of awesome talent that it just blows my mind. It's amazing.
What episode are you on? Are you almost done with it?
I think I've only watched 3 of them because I was like, if I keep binge watching this, it's going to go away, and that made me sad.
No, yeah, it gets better.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah, you're gonna enjoy it
more.
So, I want to thank you again for taking the time to chat. I was really excited that you were willing to come on and chat for a few minutes. So thank you I know you're busy and you have a lot going on, so I appreciate it.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. This was awesome. I'm really grateful to you for all the support that you've given me, and Nocturne has been so wonderful. And this was awesome. This was so fun. It was nice to talk about all my favorite stuff.
Yeah. And when your novel is getting ready to be released, let me know how I can help. I'd be more than happy to help out and spread the word and
thank you.
Get it out there and get it in people's hands, because it's going to be awesome, I'm sure.
Thank you so much. Well, fingers crossed this agent who now has it will like it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
Thanks.
So for people who, if people want to contact you or want to find out more about you, where can they find you on social media, and your website's down below, but on Twitter or?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. My handle is Holly B. Diaz, or my website is authorhbdiaz.com. And I'm on Goodreads and have an Amazon profile and everything. But if you just want to say hi, I'm at, you can send me an email. It's authorh.b.diaz@gmail.com. So we'd love to hear from anybody. Say hello.
And I will put all that information down below in the description for people who want to contact you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks again. I really appreciate the time and getting just to chat a few minutes. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So thanks again.